Hide glue, the stuff you can never find. Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. Today I want to talk about hide glue. And if you've never used this before, you may have come across it in the big box store in this little brown container of liquid hide glue, or you may have seen other people using old brown glue. Both of them are fairly easy to use. You need to heat up the old brown glue a little bit to get it functional, whereas the tight bond wood glue flows really nicely. But if you really want to get into hide glue, you're not getting into hide glue unless you use it in its dry form and making it that way. The problem is these can actually be really expensive to get a pound of hide glue. And I wanted to go and show you that you don't have to go and buy the expensive stuff. You can actually make it yourself. And here's the batch that I just whipped up, and we're going to be showing how to make that out of dog chew toys. So let's dive in.
First thing I want to do is start with rawhide, and this is a natural rawhide that I ordered online. I'll leave a link to it down below. I just want to make sure it doesn't have flavoring and other things in it that might get in the way. But just about any dog chew toy that is marked as natural rawhide is pretty good. And so I want to soak it in this and make it a little bit more flexible, easier to cut. Sometimes you can cut it with it hard, but I find it a little bit easier to let it soak for half an hour or so just to soften up a bit and then go ahead and cut it. I'm just going to soak it in enough water to submerge it all. Every now and then stir it around like this so that I keep everything submerged until it's cut up into smaller pieces. Once it's starting to get soft, then I'll bring it out and chop it up into smaller pieces. Just pieces that are, small enough that the water can get all the way around them, and you tend to get a better yield out of this. Not so small that they would go through a strainer, but usable chunks around the size of a quarter. Sometimes the knife works really well, especially if you've sharpened it and know it's really good. But in some of the pieces, the scissors actually work very well to snip it together. And I'm just going to be slicing it all up. Here you can kind of get an idea of the sizes of the pieces. I'm working with about 1 pound of rawhide here to give you an idea of how much 1 pound of rawhide will yield. Once it's all been sliced up, I'm going to then put it into the dish, into the crock pot, and then let it soak. Let it sit in there for about 6-7 hours, depending upon temperature and whatnot. I'm going to keep it on high temperature, which is around 140 degrees in the crock pot here. So once I've cut them all up, let them soak, and when you'll see that when you mix it with the stick, when you pull the stick out, the end of the stick starts to get really sticky and, stick-ish. That's when you know it's about good. But 6 to 7 hours on high is usually about right. And you want it to be really watery and runny like this, and it will run out into a cheesecloth or something like that you can actually strain off the excess. Here I'm going to just use an old towel and strain it off into a bowl. Any of the chunks and things like that, you don't want those in the glue. You want it to be as clean and smooth as possible. So I'll pull this off and I'll set all this excess aside because I'll be using that in the future. You can usually get 2, 3, or even 4 boils out of this, and each one will give you progressively less material and slightly less quality. As the first one is usually your best quality, but you can always get more out of it. And so if you want to get every penny's worth out of your 1 pound of rawhide, you can re-soak it. And I'll probably do a second soak with this batch as well. I want to pour it out into a pan, and if I had a bunch of pans, I'd probably pour it out into a bunch of them so that it's no more than 1/4 inch thick. In this case, it'll be about 1 inch or so thick, and that works fairly well. Just take a little bit longer to get to the gelatin stage. Here you can see what I have left over from that batch. I'm going to set this in the refrigerator, and then a little while later, I will make a second batch worth. You can leave it in the refrigerator for several weeks actually before it starts to go bad. So once that has been out, I can bring over a fan and start the drying process on this. I'm going to let it dry for an hour or 2. It's actually going to cool down, not dry, and as it cools down, it turns into basically jello. Well, it is jello, it's gelatin. You can see some videos where people will actually make it out of gelatin. And you can peel it back and you'll start to get that really thick, heavy skin. This is when you know it's right. Now you could just leave it like this and actually use it in this gelatin state. You put it in the refrigerator and it will last for a good long time. Even out of the refrigerator, just at room temperature, most of the time you can leave it for a week or so without any problem. But I actually like to dry it out so that it lasts a lot longer and that it is, well, more like the store-bought stuff you can get in the bags. And so what I'll do is break it into smaller pieces. I want them to be about pea size in that range. And at this stage, you can just kind of crush it with your fingers, crumble it together, and it will fall in. I bought this dehumidifier a while ago. One of the nice things about this is that it's completely water soluble, so when it's done, you can throw it in the dishwasher and you can still use the dehydrator for other things. But don't tell my wife. It's also really nice that it doesn't stick to the plastic at all, so it chips off of this and leaves it actually really nice and clean. But I'll let it sit in the dehumidifier for 12 hours or so until you get to this really crispy state where it just kind of crumbles and crushes in your hand. There's absolutely no moisture in it at all, and it works really well. Then I want to put it into a blender. In this case, just a magic bullet. It's small enough to all fit in there, and I can grind it down into a powder. And just like that, you have basically the exact same stuff you would get in the bag form of hide glue. I'll put it into an airtight container that I can set aside and use for the future. In this case, a glass jar works absolutely perfectly. And here you can see the difference between the store-bought stuff and the stuff I made. It's identical in just about every way and works just as well.
So there you go, you've made your own hide glue. So I made about 4 ounces of hide glue, so about 1/4 pound. And if I were to distill down the rest of the hide that I left out of there, I can probably get about another 4 ounces out of that. But for right now, that's what I'm going to use. So for a pound of raw hide, which is what I distilled down, that's the first batch I got out, and once I distill it down farther, I'm probably going to get out another batch. The smaller test size I did was about the same. It was about 1/4 of the weight you got back in your first batch. So making hide glue is actually really simple, and this is an extremely old thing. Even if you don't have all these other items out there, you can make it over a fire in your backyard. You don't need to have all the expensive crock pot and such. You can make hide glue the old-fashioned way. And when I mean old-fashioned, I mean thousands and thousands of years old-fashioned way. So some of you might be asking, how strong is that in comparison to actual hide glue, in comparison to some of the modern PVA glues? Well, I'm going to be doing a test video on that very shortly, where I'm going to be comparing my hide glue to other hide glues, to super glue and PVA and epoxy, and I have like almost 30 different glues I'm going to be testing. So I'm looking forward to doing that. If you're watching this months from now, I may already have that video out. Go and look for it. So that's about it for today. I hope you enjoyed this. Making your own glue is actually fairly simple. I'm going to be showing you a couple other methods in the future, but for right now, hide glue. I do want to say thank you to the patrons on Patreon. You guys are the reason why I can keep making videos like this. If you like this and would like to help out, there's a link right down there. You can find out more about Patreon. Also, if you'd like to subscribe, you can do that right here. And if you'd like to see some other things that are happening in the shop, kind of behind the scenes videos and things that are coming up, I have my second channel right here. And that's about it for today. Until next time, have a wonderful day.